Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video here in the series Going Modular. I realized recently that I hadn't done one of these videos, and I did recently work on a short video where I talked through a new configuration of one of my Eurorack cases. So in fact, this particular video is inspired by that shorter video I recorded in Las Vegas getting ready for a performance presentation at UC Irvine. And so this particular focus will be on the idea of using reconfiguration as a way of really generating new creativity within your rack modular compositions. And by reconfiguration, I'm really thinking of the idea of taking any number of your modules and reorganizing and reorienting them. Now, of course, some people maybe who have a really big setup or actually a small setup probably have all their modules in one place, and they're not maybe doing a lot of alteration or changes within their cases. I'm in a somewhat different situation, I guess you could say. I have a medium-sized setup, and I have a good deal of external gear. And one piece of external gear that I've been trying to incorporate recently is the Folktech mescaline. And actually, the mescaline is currently here in this case, and I'll dive into that in a bit. But if you're familiar with it, it comes with this stand, which is a really nice well-constructed stand, although I'm noting mine has a little bit of a bend here in one of the bars. I bought it used, and I think something maybe happened while it was being transported, and that's actually, I think, been affecting my layout of things. And it's always one of the things when you buy gear used on Reverb, you get it for a good price, but sometimes you get defects like this, and I actually didn't notice that until very recently. But if you're familiar with the mescaline, it has 3 units, and those 3 units all fit like this. Although I think it's a good setup for musical composition, in some respects I feel as if it doesn't really allow you to work with it organically and also in combination with your other Eurorack gear. So what I recently did was to scrap the stand basically, and I actually put the mescaline in my Eurorack case, and that was that last video I did on Las Vegas where I was talking about getting ready for this new performance I was doing. So let me just shift the camera. I'm going to add a camera right here, and then we're going to actually jump in to my cases and we'll talk about reconfiguration. And then I'm actually going to take you through a sonic portrait, moving from piece to piece, and talk a little bit about my approach to creating a composition and the different levels of that. So let me switch the cameras up here. Okay, I think that's better. I'm just going to go ahead, and I've got a loop playing here. So one of the things I do with my musical compositions, I'll get into the whole process, but I have this loop playing. So what I sometimes like to do, and I'll actually record this and have a camera probably back here so I can get the modular system in front of the screen here. And so this is just a Video Blocks loop that I created and put on YouTube, and then I can use as a backdrop. So I think it looks pretty good visually having it going during a composition. So this particular one, actually using this loop, is in my series Spaces of Extreme Mystery. So it's a space like any other in this series where I typically have one loop going, and it's some sort of evocative landscape. And this one looks somewhat fictive, I think, just with the shooting stars and the colors. But I thought it would look pretty good, and I did a little color grading on it to make it more of a orange kind of hue coming out in the background there. And so I have many of my cases set up here. So if you're familiar, I have 2 of the Tip Top audio cases, and those have been working great, and so far those have allowed me to fit all my Eurorack modules in 2 cases. And then of course I have some external gear ranging from a few effects pedals to things like some Soma gear, including the Lyra 8 and the wind instrument, the pipe. I also have some electroacoustic instruments. I have some smaller gear like a Castle mini synth that's pretty small that I use for my microenvironment series. So that being said, even if I get all of my modules into 2 cases, I'm still going to have external gear. And then came in the issue of the Voltage Research Laboratory, which is, of course, by Pittsburgh Modular. And I've been exploring this instrument, but it's absolutely amazing. And it's one of these where I feel like if you were just wanting one self-contained unit, you couldn't go wrong really with this instrument. It would keep you happy for years and years and years in terms of modular experiments. It's currently, I think, $15.99 for those of us who bought it on Kickstarter, which was my case. It was $300 less. And that price difference actually was really what led me into purchasing it. I heard some of the sounds, and it was one of those that just really jumped out at me in terms of having a very experimental timbre and rhythmic sensation to it. So I've been really happy with that. So if you recall my last video at the Excalibur that I did explaining this case, this is that particular case right here. And so what I wanted to do was to really use the 3 modules from the mescaline as a primary sound and clock generating source. Now the advantage to that is it's amazing, the DuPont cables, the patching, you get some experimentalism and indeterminacy that is really out of this world. You also get the effects side of things going, some really great effect sounds. And so those 3 in tandem are really powerful. Now the disadvantage is as I was moving from the case or the stand that they're mounted in, it takes up a ton of HP. And actually Behringer has just announced, and I know this last week or so, Behringer has been in a ton of controversy related to what appears to be a really insensitive and silly video targeting the music journalist and musician, electronic composer, Peter Kern. So if you've been following that controversy, clearly Behringer this last week has taken some hits for that video. But they're introducing a new case which some have said closely resembles the Tip Top Audio. And of course there's always this assertion with Behringer that they are riffing or copying certain instruments for the masses. I'm not going to get into that political situation. I will say I'm super excited with some of their modular offerings coming out, their Moog and other Roland replications coming out. Some of these modules will be as low as $59. So that is actually pretty exciting to think about what that's going to offer many of us if we're just starting or we want to complement our system. Although in my case, it tends to get a little out of control and unwieldy just in terms of having space in my office, which doubles as a space for my writing, for my teaching, for my video work, and also for doing musical experiments and watching TV or something like that. So it does get challenging, but with what Behringer has been doing lately, I feel as if the affordability of modular is really becoming a reality. And I still think it is affordable. And as a reminder, I need to do that video on the issue of the economics of modular and Eurorack systems. So the reason I mentioned the new Behringer, I think it's called the Go case, it adds, I'm trying to think how much more, maybe that much more HP, so that it might actually be enough to get, say, 2 of these, 2 of the mescaline units here, and then I have a lot of HP still to work with, because this takes up most of the case if you look at it. Almost, 3/4 of the case, I would say, is taken up. And then I've thrown matter in as well because of the DuPont ability to jump with the other 3 mescaline units, motion, mental, and channel. I always kind of forget the names, and the names are, I think, very avant-garde going along with the folk tech aesthetic and approach. So I'm saying that the Behringer cases might be useful for me because I really run into an issue now. I have another external case. I probably still have a good amount of HP left. I don't know, maybe 1 row of the tip-top case of other modules out there. I'm also in a situation of having some modules. Case in point here, a very useful module, the Make Noise Pressure Points and Brains, which allows you for some really interesting control voltage differences, using the pressure plates, and of course adding the brains gives you a sequencer. This actually was purchased before I bought the Hermit by Scorp Instruments, and that is my go-to sequencer. And actually I'm not using it at all in this particular composition I'm working on here with the video on the screen. And that's kind of one of my points with this video, is to talk about reconfiguration as a way of really changing your approach very quickly and I think organically to a composition that you might be working on, or a new idea, or a series of songs or something like this. But I'm saying this because my conundrum now is, what do I do with pressure points? I could sell it, get a few $100 on Reverb, buy more modules, but it's always that issue of bringing modules in and taking them out, and then dealing with your space, your limitations of your cases, when you have to always create more space. I mean, Tip Top actually just released brackets that I'm interested in that will take both of these units and allow you to have a really large system. And they're about 35 bucks or so, so I thought that would be a good option. But then I have to think about ergonomically where that's going to sit on a desk. It wouldn't work here with this particular setup unless maybe I had a much wider board on this keyboard stand. So it's always an issue of looking at what's available in terms of your cases and how much room do you have to expand. Do you sell some modules? Do you put them in dry dock, so to speak? I have a few modules just in storage. Do I bring those back? Do I switch out my cases over time, maybe to inject some new creativity into my process and so forth? A lot of interesting questions for us to ask in terms of just the layout of our cases, and I have some other videos specifically on that topic. So once I set up this new case, which was for this performance/talk I was giving at UC Irvine on toxic subjects, and I really wanted to use the sound setup here for that, I thought, okay, now what do I do with my other case? And so I had used, as you can see, some empty spots, some modules from here and put them in here to really customize this case. Warps was the latest module I purchased, which I'm absolutely loving with the Parasite firmware, which has an almost DJ style mixer knob here that's really nice and fun and kind of tactile. So I like that feature, and it's pretty cool that it lights up. Because in some cases, some of our modules, like our 2HPs or whatever, they're pretty boring, right? They're very functional, but this actually has a little bit of an aesthetic appeal to it. And once you throw in the Parasite's firmware, you're really charting into some new, interesting sonic territories. So the idea behind this composition was, let me take my case that I had set up. And my whole point in that last video, if I explained it or not, I'm trying to recall, was to suggest that by simply reorienting my case, by pulling out a bunch of modules, putting in the mescaline, and then adding other modules around the mescaline to see what would work with it organically, that was really my interest in creating this new case and doing the reconfiguration. So as I said, once I had the 3 modules, or actually 4 modules, mescaline plus matter, I had limitations. I had to be very particular. I actually couldn't fit, say, the Hermit sequencer in there at all because it'd be too big for the case. And so then at that point, it became, well, what could complement the Folktech modules and would still be space efficient? Well, the very first thing I needed was my Levitate mixer. And unfortunately, I couldn't bring in my, my VCA module that goes along with it. When I invested in the Roger Stone's radar, the VCA unit, and also Levitate, they all have 8 channels, so they work together well. And then, lo and behold, my Rossum sample player also has 8 channels. So there's a nice paralleling of this, and actually so does the Hermit. So it gives me some opportunities, not that you're ever limited to 8 channels, but there's a sense of symmetry between those modules. And so it's sometimes nice to carry that symmetry across a case in terms of a theme. The other theme I think that was important for me was some of the very interesting physical modeling capabilities of rings and also elements. Now I have the clone versions of these, and to some degree you lose some of what was nice about those original modules. Anything by Mutable Instruments, you know, just from a design standpoint, is absolutely just, they're some of the best looking and best made modules out there. I mean, this was actually my very first. I bought a used secondhand copy of Clouds, and it was what really pushed me into Eurorack, because I saw some demos of it and I said, this granular approach, and this was before I had even known about the Parasite's firmware upgrade, this granular approach is really going to take my sound to some new dimensions. So Lost, I think in these clones, you save a ton, over maybe, could be up to half the price depending on if you buy it secondhand or used. But you lose some of the aesthetics and also the functionality. Now if you've seen Elements, it's a big chunk of a case. It's probably about that much of a case versus that much. Same thing with Rings. Rings is a little bit smaller. But for me, these 2 modules in a case, and I actually couldn't fit Elements in here, are really astonishing because they run the range of FM type sounds. With the Parasites, you get some interesting, in Rings, ambient reverb effects. They can do percussive sounds, they can do bell type sounds, metallic-y sounds, very distorted harsh sounds that would really replicate the some of the sounds I might get, say, out of my cart module, and a few others, my muskrat. So they do a lot. So this particular module packs a wallop in such a small HP space. I knew I wanted rings in there, it would fit. Again, I had to have my mixer. Not having the VCAs is a limitation, and then just having 8 channels, I knew it was going to be limited, and I brought along for my trip performance some of my multiple modules because I wanted to be able to break some things off. I was also using these speakers, which allowed me the opportunity to really have a compact system, including the actual amplification of it during my trip. Then I added the disting module because it does so many different things. I added a few effects modules, I added the freeze, and the very latest addition was the warps, which just allowed me to take 2 channels of sound. Also it has an internal oscillator. It allows me to do quite a bit, and once I installed the Parasites firmware upgrade, it really more than quadruples what this module can do. It has so many different modes now, and it makes it a little confusing, so I recommend downloading cheat sheets, and it's something I've done for the disting module. And the disting is in some ways my favorite and least favorite module. My favorite because for the price and for the size, it does literally everything, and the upgrades of the firmware allow you to do so much more and more and more over time. It is a module that if you had, like 5 or 6 of them in a case, you could literally get so much done just because it does everything running the range from clock sources to oscillators to effects units to sample playback to recording to all sorts of strange comparator and attenuator and quantizing modules that if you had to do that in a case, it would be multiple cases just to get all those modules. So that's the great thing about it. The price is amazing. It's constantly being upgraded, but download one of these sheets, because what you have to do is use it really as a cheat sheet to know what particular effect or program or algorithm you're accessing. And that part of it is really hard. So for me, the menu diving in this, because it just has a very small screen, it doesn't have the big OLED screen like the Hermit, which is not that big actually, or the assimilator. As a result, it's really hard for me to find programs to, of course, remember them. And the display as it scrolls across, I'm not one of those readers that can just read those and kind of make sense of them as they go across the screen. So a disadvantage, but I wanted it in my case because I thought it's going to give me options to move around if I need to in the performance between effects units, oscillators, all sorts of interesting CV potentials there to modulate other aspects of the Folk Tech gear. So that was this case, and I'm going to come back to you probably later in the future and talk about another project I'm doing related to a performance at the college where I teach. And this particular performance will be using, I think, one URR case or the VRL, and also some electric acoustic instruments and some looping devices to do some Foley sound effects for a performance that we're creating. So I took this case, and one of my goals was to use really the core of mental and matter as the beginnings of both the clock sources and the sonic sources, and then expand out there, either using the jacks that convert 35 millimeter to DuPont cables, or taking a clock source and then putting it into my passive mult, either one of these, but the case version of my Synthrotech, which was I think $20 new, is really nice because you can do a lot of options there to multiply your signals, and I haven't found a lot of loss in the signal. And if that happened, maybe the ears module. The ears, of course, allows you to do a lot for electroacoustic purposes, but it really gives you that gain potential to take a signal and really up it. That could be an audio signal from an electroacoustic homemade instrument, or it could be any CV or audio signal from your case. So that really gives you some potential to not have the signal loss issue that sometimes happens with multiples and those kinds of configurations. So using this case for this composition, I said I want to add to it. What can I add to it? So I started to take the old case. I'm missing some modules, and I'm going to think about, are these the right modules? But I'm going to go with what is happening here. I also wanted to bring in the VRL because it's such a powerful synthesizer in its own right. And of course, it allows, as a semi-modular instrument, for easy patching. I haven't found any issues with the jacks, the inputs and the outputs, and I actually bought some right angle versions. They're not the most expensive on Amazon, and I haven't really used them. So I'm currently in that stage thinking I didn't have to buy the right angle cables because it's not an issue with space and ergonomics on the VRL. So I have all these components then going. What I'm going to do in this experiment is to talk you through just where this composition is going. So the first stage I think I'm suggesting in this reconfiguration video for any case is to think about, again, depending on your size, if you have everything laid out in front of you or you have a really small case, it might be irrelevant. But in my case, I'm trying to think about how can I create any single case in such a way that the components are working, the modules are working with one another in an organic sense. And then in this case, I have, of course, interfacing and crosstalk between these three main units, the semi-modular and the two modular cases. I'm missing some modules, so in the future I do need to address what's happening with those missing modules. Am I getting another case? I think I'm going to wait for the Behringer Eurorack Go case to see the price point and to see how it might be size-wise, and then think about maybe bracketing these two together with those $35 brackets, and then maybe having a setup that would have the Eurorack Go case here, these two kind of as a high stand, and then I don't know where my other external gear would fit. It's always a challenge in that sense. So in this composition, I'm beginning first, and I should say, just to go back a bit, so the process, stage one, I would say, is to create your case or cases and think about what modules need to go where and how they're going to complement one another. Stage two is start with one initial foundation, and for me, it's generally a clock source. It doesn't have to be, because a lot of your oscillators, right, or using an audio rate envelope or something like that, you can create sound right without any actual clock sources. But I began with a clock source, and in this case it's going to be from the mescaline, from Motion. But actually what I first want to do, I'm going to put on the headphones here just so I can hear what's happening. I want to take you through the steps, and so step one is creating your case, and step two is starting to bring in parts based on that initial foundation. So for me, I'll begin with the clock source, but first I just want to show you, because I actually don't have it triggered. I don't have either of the two sequencers triggered on Motion, so I'm just going to sort of play what's happening here and suggest to you that I may want to, or you may want to, record different takes, if you will, or different snippets of sounds, different almost stems of sounds from your Eurorack composition. And then you have different options to work with in later stages of your musical work. So what I'm going to be doing, once this is ready to go and I've done enough rehearsing, I have my screenshot ready here with the backdrop, I'm going to actually take individual outs and put them into my big Allen & Heath mixer, which is a 16-channel mixer. I typically try to have one channel per module if that's applicable. If it's going through an effects unit, obviously I'm going to have two modules but only one output. If it's stereo, then we have another issue there to address in terms of outs. So that way I have more control in post-production. So in the kind of sequence I'm taking you through, step one is creating a case, thinking about organic structure and complementarity and crosstalk between your modules. Step two is starting with some sort of foundation. I'm suggesting a clock source just because I'm doing rhythmic stuff. Step three is painstakingly go through each layer or channel of sound, and that's what I'm going to take you through here in this recording. And by the way, recording will use just a mono out into my Tascam recorder just for ease of recording, and then I will not apply any external effects. I will do it in the composition that results from this, but not in this particular video. So step three is really tweaking things. Step four is actually recording things to my mixer. Step five will be post-production. So I will take all the digital channels, the WAV files from the mixer, from the USB drive, run those into Logic Pro, and then I will, of course, do the kind of stuff we do in post-production, which might be adding effects, using some of the isotope software that I purchased to really clean up the sound, or to bring out highs or lows, or do equalization, to do some of that stuff. The step after that will be taking those into Final Cut Pro, which is my video program, along with the video I've shot here and this loop. That process itself, as I suggested to you in some previous videos, is actually one of mixing too. I'm trying to match my stems from the Eurorack composition, those WAV files that have been processed through Logic Pro, and I'm trying to match it with the video. And I often will do something like, if I'm recording a rhythmic track from the assimilator and I've got some nice drum stuff, if I want to get instant polyrhythms, I can throw in a delay in post, or I can also take multiple WAV files, and just doing that process of the minute adjustment, going either forward or back using your key command to do that, pushing the WAV file this way or this way in conjunction with the video, I can create some great polyrhythms. So that stage of the recording actually also is part of the composition process. And so for me, it's a very long process that begins thinking with what the case is going to look like and how the modules are going to interface, all the way through the final process of connecting with the video. I think some people might be inclined to just throw one final mix, maybe throw that in post, then throw it out into the video and work the video clip with this one file from point A to B. For me, that's a little bit too linear, so what I want to do instead is have that composition grow using the stems for my Eurorack compositions recorded into my mixer, and then adding, it's almost another instrument layer there where I'm mixing them in conjunction with the video. And if you have some questions about that, I have some other videos about that very topic. But let's jump right into some of the music here and let me show you this process. So I think what I'll do is let's start up Motion, both sequence tracks. And you know, this sequencer is very unique in terms of adjusting the gates and adding and subtracting steps, and you can do it all in combination with your clock sources. And if you want more about the mescaline, of course, there's a whole slew of videos about them, about the units. But so my first track would be from Mental. Let's look at my levels here. Now, of course, just beginning with this phase and having some rhythmic tracks, you know, depending on what you want to do, you can immediately just trying to find something interesting. That's kind of harsh and interesting and harmonic, so we'll go with that. And that's going to be then my initial layer. Based on what's happening here, there's actually quite a bit. So I'm taking a clock source out of here and I'm running that into the VRL. And actually, I have to say in retrospect, I didn't need that because I thought the VRL was going to be doing a rhythmic piece. I'm actually using it for kind of a squelchy drone that I have running through a channel for its interesting reverb effects. And so that's going to come in later. But so I do have that clock source. I have another series of different clock sources patched out from the really, what's cool about Motion is it just has so many potential clock sources. Using it in combination with the jacks here allows you then to translate from DuPont to 35M. And then as I said, I typically will take one of these, run it into another multiple, and I can multiply that clock source through various modules. Another way of doing that, of course, would be using stackable cables, and you get a second out potentially, or maybe a third one depending on signal loss. I also have, when I bought my mescaline, this module was thrown in, which is a prototype on Kickstarter discovered recently by a Polish designer, which never actually got funded. So I think a few of these were made. It's a passive unit that will allow you to translate DuPont to 35mm. It's kind of cool that these exist. You know, other versions of, say, the Buchla format or Kilpatrick Audio, the Phenol, have that same issue where you have to translate one cable size to another and also have to ground those units to make sure you don't have any issues. Okay, so that's our initial sound, if you will. And again, I am going to alter that radically during the composition. In fact, I'm not loving this right now. Let me go back to what I had. Those clicky percussive drums, which are, I think, pretty unique to the Motion as well, to the mescaline, the Motion, and all the folk tech gear. That rhythmic percussive sound that you don't get in a lot of other sound sources. So the next thing I was trying to do was bring in my drone, and It's pretty simple. I could actually use, if I wanted to, let's see. There actually is, I'm triggering a drone with the key trigger here on channel, but I think I only have one output plugged in coming out of it, so I will definitely correct that for post-production. So you're going to get a couple of drones. The main one is through the VRL, through a patch here. And it's a pretty simple patch. But by adjusting the filter, effect rate, the feedback, which always hard to access as the case gets more and more getting pretty distorted. But that's going to be the main drone source, and it's just a pretty good use of the VRL, and I'm actually going to sort of in real time perform it, adjusting the pitch knobs and the secondary oscillator. We'll pull that one out for just a second. That's the third channel. And again, these will get stereo versions in a lot of cases. But this is just my creating the palette of sounds, and then I'm going to work on remixing it to the mixer and dealing with all those issues. So next I'm going to bring in rings on channel 4. And rings is going through warps, as you can tell from this. It's a wave shaper module, unlike a lot of other ones, just in terms of the potential to really thoroughly mangle your sound, combine sources, leverage the internal oscillator, adjust the levels with some interesting clock sources, even change the algorithm and the timbre. More and more modules, Plonk will do this, many other modules, where you can actually cycle through the sample, if it's a sample playback module, or actually sample through the different algorithms, which give you a very interesting opportunity to do some things with the sound through your clock sources. So I can go in a million directions with this because I'm adjusting the timbre here. I have a clock source going into the strum and also going into the volt per octave. And it'd be too hard to diagram it for you right now, but basically they're all variations of the clocks coming from motion. All those various subdivisions of the beat are coming out, being translated into 35mm format, and then affecting, like in this case, if I take out the volt per octave, it's hard to tell because of our warping, but if I take out the oscillator, can you tell? Hard to make out. Let's take the damp down. Really hard to make out, but if we plug it back in, now we're getting the rhythmic clock. I actually like that right there. I'm going to leave that. One of the things I want to suggest is that as I'm building things up, every time I add a new channel of sound, I'm thinking about the relationship to that main foundation. Again, using motion and mental as that main rhythmic and sonic source. What happens is as you add new channels, because of the ability to alter the sound at the level of, say, a wave shaper or an effects unit, or at the level of clock sources, which allow you to modulate any number of parameters of your module, in this case rings, it's not to say that that sound or the rhythm produced will work. So you go through that painstaking process of maybe adding or removing sources of modulation, or doing an alteration of the sound itself. Too trebly, too bassy. Adjust for that. Then, because it's going into a wave shaper, I could further adjust the sound. And I can further modulate here, which could affect the rhythm and the sound. So that ability to grow over time, sort of from minimalism to maximalism in terms of your sound sources, is for me what makes the nature of Eurorack and modular setups so organic and experimental in nature. Things change over time, and you might get to your fifth track of sound, have to go back and alter what happened more at the initial layers. It's almost like a painter who is maybe sketching at first something and then adding different layers of color, different layers on top, shading and shadowing and doing other things. So we'll go with that for now, and then we'll add channel 5, which is actually the alternate output from Warps going into the 2HP Freeze, which was one of those modules that for a while I thought doesn't really do much, but lately I've been really bringing it back into some compositions and I enjoy it quite a bit. So let me bring that in for you, channel 5. And let's pull out channel 4. Totally different glitch type sound. Sorry to blast your ears there. Okay, so I can use that rhythmically or as sort of a mini granular low bit drone of some sort. And in post-production, something like that, you can widen it, do stereo splitting. I also will use some of the surround settings either in Logic or Final Cut Pro. So that sounds really dull and boring harmonically, and also in terms of panning. But once you take that into post-production, you can do a million things with it, and it has actually quite a bit of use, I see. So that is channel 5. We'll leave that low. I'll bring 4 back in for you a little bit. Okay, and then 6 I have to check is pluck. Another module I love. I'm really into the physical modeling modules. So something else is happening here. What I did was, once I brought in this case, I said I need to get a clock source up here somewhere. So I did, and that is, hold on, coming from my multiple. So I took the main clock source from here, ran into a multiple, took many of those multiples out down here, and then I said I need one up here to communicate with the top case in terms of the clocks, because I do want something rhythmic. If I was using Hermit and doing more experimental, organic, indeterminate kind of rhythms and polyrhythmic stuff, I wouldn't care so much. So I've got my qubit Chance, which is a great clock source. It does so much, I feel. And I have that running into a lot of different modules. But initially, I'm using it to control pluck. And I'm using, I think, what output? The blend output. So let's bring in pluck. And pluck is going through the 2HP reverb. So I'm getting a little bit of reverberation pre. Sometimes I do like to record my effects in pre because I feel like you get a better sense of how the parts are going to relate to one another. In post-production, there's some limitation to what you can do because you've already recorded all your stems. But let's bring that in. That's channel 6. Hard to access here, but let's do it. Sorry, it's channel 7. Six is 2HP bell, which I'll get to. So what I will typically do is if I'm bringing a sound in, I will mess with whatever the core parameters of that sound source are. So it could be the damping, it could be the pitch, it could be, I'm trying to think in some of the other modules, the decay and plonk or something like that. So I found kind of a sweet spot adjusting the sound. Too reverberating here. I don't think that's a word. Too much reverb here. So I kind of dialed that in, and then I found a pitch point. I could, of course, with a tuner, figure out the pitch. I'm not too worried about that, so I'm just looking for something that's going to fit in rhythmically, harmonically, and then in terms of pitch, I might adapt it, say, based on the drones coming out of here or here. Not a big deal. You can do that by ear, or you could use a tuner, whatever you want to do. Okay, now that I've got that, go back to channel 6, and that's actually 2HP bell. In this one, I believe I did something interesting rhythmically here. I looked at, let's see, my clock sources. I'm actually using a different clock source from some of the ones going through the multiple. And that's what I like about matter, or that's what I like about motion, is I can take, say, the clock 4th subdivision or 8th subdivision, run that into here, translate it through the jack. That is going into bell, and I'll bring that in, channel 6. And I believe, and I'm saying I believe because I haven't mapped this out, yeah, it's running into the Pico DSP, sort of pitch shifting algorithm, delay. And this is one of the nice things about doing this as you start to build things over time. If I wanted to add a rhythmic variation, some kind of syncopation, I could do that, of course, with my clock source. I could do it with, again, modulation sources within the unit itself, including audio rate stuff coming in from envelope generators, and I could do that with an effects unit. Of course, a delay, when I think of delay, I always think it's all about rhythm, essentially, as opposed to reverb, which is about atmospherics. So I would just get that maybe to a place where I like it. Probably a point prior to the final mix that I'll be doing to create my stems will be to go through and fine tune certain parameters, and then during the performance, if I can make sense of it all, right, because I haven't written out a patch sheet, I will actually try to sit down and modulate things in real time just to give that variation that makes music interesting. So we have all 7 of our channels going here. I think you don't hear the drone channel, do you? Let's see, or a little bit of it. It's hard to hear in the headphones right now because I have one ear off, but yeah. But you get the main idea. So now I'm going to bring in channel 8. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to complement what's happening with mental harmonically up here, and I thought, again, once I had my clock source up here through the qubit chants, I thought, let's start with elements. So I'll bring in channel 1, and I've taken out all the other channels just for the sense so you can actually hear this. What I'm trying to accomplish here is actually channel 2. There we go. So a couple things going on here. We've got going into the geometry input, an envelope here from channel 2. You can hear the difference. Pretty dramatic difference there. And then the FM mod is coming out of the divider from chants. See how quickly we can get, harmonically, timbrally, rhythmically, something to complement what's going on below here with the mescaline. And I'm going to bring my divider down. You can do this by ear. You could create a polyrhythm, you could do syncopation. And I'm going to change that later, but just see how useful elements can be as a module. It's truly one of my favorites. So we'll bring 1 down just for the sake of this recording so you can hear it. Bring in 2. And 2 is Planck, and I'm adjusting that. The trigger is, again, from chants, a different trigger output. And then I also have the mod input from another trigger output from chants is impacting or modulating the interharmonic level. I can adjust my decay. And I can go the range of octaves to find something that will suit what I'm looking for, so that is pretty good. And then our third channel coming in. Plates. And I'm working here with an envelope. And you see how useful it is to have more than a couple of envelopes and VCAs in your system. So I'm getting kind of that skipping effect. And I'm taking the rhythmic output from chance just into the trigger. So if I'm pretty happy with that, I can let that go. And then channel 4 is a particular percussion sound from the assimilator, which is, I think, called barbecue can lid. Kind of hear it hitting there, a little metallic sound. And I'm going to adjust that over time. And I think that's everything from the top case. So this is by no means complete, but the point of what I'm trying to do is to suggest you a process beginning with that initial channel of sound from mental and building that over time. So in this last section, I'll just bring in all the various parts and you could hear what the mix might sound like in the future, including a little bit of the drone from the VRL. As you look out for this final performance that I'll be doing here, you can see how I went through this process of creating the various parts here. And just to kind of sum up this video before I do the music out, again, my suggestion for this video is for you to think about ways to reconfigure your cases such that hopefully you have a workflow that is going to work for you in terms of creating interesting compositions depending on the process that you use to approach your own sonic or musical design. So thanks for listening, and I'll lead you out then with just a little more of this track in progress.